California's sanctuary policies come under attack as the president plans to visit San Diego. Claims of sexual assault involving special ed students at Lincoln High School, how the victims' families say the case was mishandled. And the new push to end sewage spills that have been impacting Imperial Beach for decades. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today, Art Castaneras, publisher of La Prensa, Michael Smolens, columnist for the San Diego Union Tribune, education reporter Mario Corran, a voice of San Diego, and KPBS environment reporter Eric Anderson. Well, Attorney General Jeff Sessions fired the first volley. Governor Jerry Brown shot back, and the political battle over sanctuary cities was joined. Sessions filed suit against California's policies protecting undocumented immigrants, blasting Oakland's mayor in particular. Brown called Sessions' lawsuit a political stunt based on outright lies. All right, plenty of political fireworks here, Michael. Start with a Sessions suit. What's the essence of it? Well,
the gist, as you pointed out, is basically to dismantle the sanctuary state of California. California has a handful of laws that gives extra protection to unauthorized immigrants. And the federal government believes that that infringes upon their abilities and rights to enforce immigration laws. So that's the conflict. Specifically, 3 laws are being targeted. One restricts what state and local law enforcement officers can tell federal agents, particularly about the release of immigrants that are in jail. Another one has similar restrictions on businesses about what they can say about citizenship of their workers, unauthorized immigrants. And the third one is it would allow the state to inspect federal detention facilities. So that's a heavy-duty load that they're going after.
And as I said, Sessions took on Oakland Mayor Libby Schaaf, claiming she endangered federal officers, warning publicly of impending ICE sweeps. And we got a bite here from the Attorney General on why he's suing. Let's hear that.
So this is a great state. I don't want to be in this position of having to challenge these laws. It wasn't something I chose to do, but I can't sit by idly while the lawful authority of federal officers are being blocked.
All right, Art, how have California leaders responded so far to Sessions' action?
Well, between the governor, the state attorney general, the leader of the California Senate, just about every Democratic official has responded saying the state is on good legal ground. These 3 laws that Michael just talked about, they don't keep the federal government from enforcing the laws. They just don't participate in helping them, and that's a big difference.
Okay.
And I think it's ironic that now it's a Republican administration suing the state over what has traditionally been states' rights.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's interesting. I mean, and Republicans have claimed states' rights in the past on various issues, certainly during the civil rights battles of the 60s and early 70s, but now kind of the shoe's on the other foot.
Sure. Well, you look back at when the Obama administration sued the state of Arizona over SB 1070. Mm-hmm. That was more aggressive than the federal law. Mm-hmm. And most
that was the Show Me Your Papers.
Show Me Your Papers. It was more aggressive. It required more documentation than what the federal government does, and most of it was struck down. Now you got a Republican administration, and you hear the words. This is the Alabama U.S. Senator, who now is the Attorney General, saying that there's no nullification. And you think back about during the civil rights, that's exactly what his state used to claim, mm-hmm. that the state should have more power than the federal government.
Well, you've read my script here. That's a perfect segue into a bite we have from Governor Jerry Brown on what he thinks about Sessions coming to California with this play.
And particularly a fellow coming from Alabama talking to us about secession and protecting human and civil rights. I do think this is pure red meat for the base, and I would assume, but this is pure speculation, that Jeff thinks that Donald will be happier with him, and I'm sure Donald will be tweeting his joy at this particular performance.
Well, it's good to hear they're still on a first-name basis there, Jerry, Jeff, and Donald. So, Michael, we've seen protests in the state over the policies of Trump and Sessions. San Diego City Council had voted to denounce Trump's border wall. How is it playing politically, and what's the status in San Diego as far as sanctuary city goes?
Well, San Diego is not an official sanctuary city. They're, and San Diego, unlike Oakland and San Francisco and some of the other Bay Area cities which have declared themselves sanctuaries, San Diego's trying to find that sort of seem to go along because they have to abide by the state sanctuary laws, but they don't want to get into trouble with the federal government. It's a tightrope for Mayor Kevin Faulconer, who, of course, is the only big Republican mayor in the nation. He's kept his distance from Donald Trump in these policies. He's all pro cross-border cooperation and, ties, economic ties, social ties, and cultural ties. So, they've been kind of keeping low-key. You mentioned they did pass that resolution, but it's just hasn't really been that hotbed at City Hall anyway, unlike other city halls in the state.
And we had, Eric, go ahead.
You had the Attorney General of the United States coming to California. Did that seem odd that he would come to California and speak to what seemed to be a kind of lukewarm reception among law enforcement officers?
There's a lot of theater here. They could have filed the lawsuit, but to come, they were looking to do that, and I think that also with, it's sort of a strategic rollout. We've got the president coming on Tuesday to inspect take a look at the border wall prototypes. And the governor used the term red meat. Well, there's red meat on both sides here. Both sides will see the protests. The Democrats are spoiling for the fight. George Skelton of the LA Times had to call them, what they did was the best thing Democrats could have asked for. They like nothing better than to getting into a fight with Trump. It elevates them on an individual basis. They look to be called out in tweets from the president. They look to get nicknames from the president because that, means they're making an impact and so forth. So while it's a very serious lawsuit, and Art says there's some, problems I think that the federal government will have, but people believe this will ultimately go to the Supreme Court. The governor has said this will outlast the Trump administration, this lawsuit. We'll see. But I think from here on, Sessions, while there was a legitimate legal push, Sessions was political theater, and we're going to see a lot of that next week with the president in town.
And Michael mentioned this visit next week by Trump on Tuesday. What are you hearing? What kind of reception might he get? Are protesters planning some things?
Sure.
Rally people on his side?
Yeah, there are already protesters on both sides that are ready for the fight. I think on Monday there's a protest already organized. And it's a lot of political theater. I think everybody's right. I think the Attorney General, who's been pushed around by the president lately, and the president wishes he could fire him, is basically auditioning for an audience of one. He wants to please the president. So coming to California and having this fight reinforces his position with the president. But I think they're on shaky ground. I think it's much different than it was in Arizona.
Okay. Well, we'll see how all that plays out. And as Michael was saying, it could take a long, long time before this suit plays out. Before we leave this topic, I did want to get a question on DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals policy. A deadline passed this week,
Sure.
Art. It's kind of back in the legal limbo, is it not?
Yeah, so the courts have stopped what Trump had ended the program and had a March 5th deadline. That's been extended. They're accepting more applications and people are refiling. So it's on an indefinite hold, and the program's going to continue to exist. I think all these issues are going to end up in front of the Supreme Court, but it could be years.
Okay, now just getting to the political aspect of that, I do have one bite here. Donald Trump, who has flip-flopped on this issue notably in the last few weeks, but here's a bite. He's talking about Democrats are nowhere to be found in DACA. They don't support DACA anymore.
And we're trying to have a DACA victory for everybody, by the way, and the Democrats are nowhere to be found. They're nowhere to be found. It's really terrible. We're ready. You know the expression, ready, willing, and able. We're ready, willing, and able. They are nowhere to be found.
The Democrats AWOL on DACA?
No, that's not true. What he just said. They obviously support a solution to the DACA situation. Trump has been moving the goalposts constantly. He's tied it to border wall funding. And then even when some Democrats were starting to say, well, maybe we should go for that, suddenly he's starting to talk about limiting legal immigration. So, aside from what he said, the whole DACA situation, that's the one thing in this whole immigration debate that has overwhelming support across the board. It's up in 70, 80%, which is unheard of. People want a solution to that. People want these people to be here. They don't want their lives disrupted. So it's clearly, just a bargaining chip that one side or the other will use, and the president seems intent on using that. I mean, it's clear that this doesn't do him particularly good politically, except I think with the very core of his base, because a lot of Republicans support that. We'll just have to see how this plays out. It's going to be all tied together in some way, or at least that's his hope, I'm sure.
Any speculation, Art, on when we might see a solution on DACA?
I think it might be a while, but I think as this year gets closer to the elections, I think there's going to be a lot of pressure to solve the DACA issue. And I think there'll be a clean bill, just up or down. If the president says the Democrats aren't there, he should put up a clean bill and see what happens.
All right. Well, we'll certainly be following up on that as we go along. We're going to turn now to a story that's as tragic as it is complex. and a warning this case involves allegations of sexual assault involving high school students. Mara, start with the incident at Lincoln High School that appears now headed to a civil court. Who were the boys involved, when and where did that incident take place?
Sure. As you said, it's an incredibly tragic, sad story, very complicated though. And it began back in August of 2016, where it involved two students at Lincoln High School who have been diagnosed as having disabilities. It started when it was during a summer school class. A teacher's aide walked into the bathroom and saw what appeared to be one boy sexually assaulting another. From the student who was the victim, or the suspected victim in the case, had very severe disabilities, is unable to communicate more than a few simple words at a time, and has some very serious medical issues. So that was the beginning of the story.
All right, and I'll note here the boys' names are withheld because they were minors at the time. And what did the lone witness to this incident say to the police?
Right, so the lone witness was a teacher's aide working there, supervising the class, overseeing the class. Apparently the boys had gone into the bathroom unsupervised for a short period of time. The teacher's aide walked in and said he saw one boy behind the other attempting to have sex with the other. So I mean, that is the statement, including the police report, according to what he saw.
And then what did the teenage suspect say when questioned about it to police?
Yeah, so one thing that's interesting and sort of mysterious is that there was no police involvement apparently on the first day. On the second day, the day after the incident, is when the school police came and interviewed witnesses, talked to the parents, talked to the school staff members. The suspect in the case came out and admitted to what these allegations are. He just frankly copped to it all and said that it lasted not a short time. He wasn't sure why he did it, but he did it.
He did this act, yeah.
Right, and that was, and I mean that was his statement.
But the official report of what happened later changed. Explain how it was reported to teachers and staff, and most importantly to the alleged victim's mother.
Right. So okay, that's a major piece of this case. The victim's mother claims she wasn't told anything, claims that the school staff had reached out to her, told her that something had happened, but luckily somebody was there to prevent an assault from happening. So there was really nothing major to worry about because they had stopped it just in time. That doesn't match what the statements are in the police report, and something very mysterious happened in the way that this case was documented. At the very beginning of the case, the day after the incident, the teachers had reported that it was one boy was attempting to have sex with another. A month later, with school back in session, the story changed a bit, apparently. The vice principal who was documenting the incident documented as an obscene act, which is sort of on the totem pole of offenses that happen at school.
A lower offense, certainly, than a sexual assault.
Right.
Which you're going to get expelled for that automatically.
Right. So the sexual assault is something that principals have to recommend students be expelled for. Not so with the obscene act. That was...
So critical difference there. Right. Now, what happened to the suspect?
So the suspect, after that it was processed as an obscene act, was able to transfer to another school in another school district. Back
at Lincoln for a time, but then to another school.
Right. He was back at Lincoln for a short time, back when school started, but then transferred quickly to another school district. And the school district that received him takes a look at his file, takes a look at whatever his past incidents were, and sees an obscene act, which doesn't, again, include the details, the more serious details or allegations. All
right, and we had a San Diego sex crimes detective involved, but he declined to file charges in this case. What was the reasoning there? Right,
that was another very interesting piece, despite the admission from the suspect and a witness statement. The school police officer who had conducted the interviews and then had passed on his reports to the SDPD detective from the sex crimes unit reviewed the statements and determined that there wasn't enough evidence that the boys hadn't articulated a crime had been committed, so therefore there wasn't enough evidence to pass it along for prosecution. That was the call he made.
All right. Now, as I said, this story it's long, it's complex, but the tragedy was compounded when a teacher, rather obsessed with this and other incidents he found outrageous at Lincoln, he ended up dead. Explain, Nathan Page, he had some stress-related absences, and then what happened to this fellow, this teacher?
Right. That's another tragic piece of the story, is that a teacher who was trying to sort of blow the whistle on a number of problems that he saw there at Lincoln, some related to this incident, some not, became especially concerned that the suspected sexual assault hadn't been reported properly, and was trying to alert the attention. He was trying to get the attention of police detectives, the school superintendent, number of people at his school, and just wasn't being able, it didn't receive a great reaction to that. And from all the documents that I'm seeing, sort of escalated in his frustrations to the point where he took a stress leave mid-year, came back after a short time, was still kind of going through some of that, later left the school on another stress leave and never came back. So that teacher ended up getting hired at a school district in Lake Elsinore, and so it appeared that things were on the up for him. Unfortunately, he drove his car off the road, a mountain road in Lake Elsinore in the end, and it was an apparent suicide.
Yeah, that case was ruled a suicide up there in that community. Okay. Wow, another tragedy. Before we leave this topic, though, how is the alleged victim's mother trying to shine a light now on what happened in the case and how it was handled by administrators at Lincoln High?
Sure. So the victim's family now has obtained legal counsel. They filed a claim with the school district, a precursor to a lawsuit. That claim was rejected, and now they're pursuing a lawsuit for negligence. So as that case winds through, more details are likely to surface, and we may know more about what transpired.
Eric? Are you seeing here a case of individual failures on the part of individuals, or is it a case where there's some sort of institutional failure?
I think that there's an argument that both are being made. I mean, there are so many interesting points in how this all transpired. To hear the attorney who's representing the family now, she believes that the case was dropped on very many levels, starting with the fact that the mother wasn't fully informed of what had happened. So, and then we could talk about how the police handled it and go through that. So there really are a series of red flags in this case and questionable actions.
Well, we'll see what happens as the lawsuit plays out, and maybe some of these things will come to light and be answered. And we're going to move along now to another story about another lawsuit involving the federal government. This one has Imperial Beach, Chula Vista, the Port of San Diego, suing the feds for failing to address cross-border sewage spills. And Eric, start by outlining the problem, what local officials wanted the federal government to do about this. And of course, these spills have been happening for decades.
Yeah, that's, when we started to think about coming here to talk about this program, I keep flashing on the image of then Imperial Beach Mayor Brian Bilbray on a bulldozer trying to stem the flow of sewage through that Tijuana River Valley, decades ago. It's a problem that's been long-standing. Tijuana sits above the United States in that part of the country. It's up on a hill, and the sewage flows downhill. It flows into the United States through the Tijuana River Valley. It has for decades. Threats of legal action in the past have caused the construction of a multi-million-dollar border treatment sewage plant, then a secondary sewage treatment facility, a huge ocean outfall that carries the effluent 3 miles offshore so it doesn't contaminate the nearshore area. But none of those steps have really gone to the point where they've completely addressed that issue. And I think what happened last year in February was that we had all these record rains after 5 years of drought that washed, hundreds of millions of gallons of sewage through that valley and into our ocean waters. And local officials just kind of got fed up with it. Imperial Beach Mayor Serge Dedina has kind of made this a personal mission to get some attention to this issue, and he drove forward, and that all eventually last week culminated in the lawsuit filed against the federal government.
And what do the feds say about why they can't, address the problem the way the local officials want them to?
Officially, the International Boundary and Water Commission, the federal agency that handles cross-border pollution and water issues, they say that, look, they can't technically talk about the lawsuit, but they've done a lot. They've talked about the problem. They've helped work with the North American Development Bank to do pollution containment projects on the Mexican side of the border, but they feel like they're hamstrung because they don't have the federal funding they need to do the job adequately. I talked to a U.S. EPA official who studied the situation last summer, and he estimated at that time that it would take more than $400 million, and this was a year ago, to fix the Tijuana sewage system so it would adequately handle all the sewage that it generates. And they're talking about projects that are in the, $7, $8, $10 million range.
It's finally time. I grew up living in Chula Vista, lived all my life there. We've had the beach closed, I don't know how many times over the years, and I remember when Bill Bray did that. But what's ironic about this conversation we're having here, that this is 100% the responsibility of the federal government, and they don't do it. And on the immigration issue we're talking about, it's 100% their responsibility, and they want the locals to enforce the immigration laws, right? So, and you talk about the numbers. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, yet Trump has proposed a $20 to $40 billion wall to keep supposedly drugs and people, but we can't stop the flow of water.
Yeah, in the scope of the federal budget, this is really pocket change. Yeah.
It's nothing money.
Maria?
I know that you had mentioned Serge Dedina, who's been the vocal in this problem for a long time. But the Border Patrol Union has also been very active in this. And do we have any indication that the voices of the Border Patrol Union or any other of the players speaking out has brought this issue?
I think they've added to the chorus. They're not a party to this particular lawsuit, but they're considering their own legal action. What they're concerned about is not so much the sewage flows that come across the border, but there are other toxic flows that come through the canyons, Goat Canyon, Yogurt Canyon, that carry toxic emissions from industries that are on the Mexican side of the border. And they've had, Border Patrol officers who have required medical attention. They have Border Patrol officers who've succumbed to the flushing bacteria because of contact that they've had with some of this toxic material. And so they are seeking their own legal action separate from this. But I think it's finally, because of what happened last November and the attention that's been focused on this on so many platforms, that it's finally got to the point where there's going to be some critical action.
And Michael, you've written about Mayor Serge Dedina screaming from the rooftops and all that, and I want to get back to that and the specifics in the lawsuit, but that sets up a bite we do have from the mayor on this whole issue.
The message from the federal government is essentially drop dead, and so that's unacceptable. We have a legal, ethical, and moral responsibility to make sure that our constituents, our residents, and the people of the United States have access to clean beaches 365 days a year. More importantly, that national security personnel, such as our Border Patrol agents and our Navy SEALs, who are flying all over the world to fight the bad guys, don't get sick from toxic waste and sewage.
All right, and that goes to what we were talking about a moment ago. So, but you wrote also, Michael, that the big dogs, the city and county of San Diego, so far haven't gotten into this suit and joined the fight.
Well, just to go back one quick point on what Eric was talking about, that it's interesting because the Border Patrol, which is under the Customs and Border Protection Agency, the Border Protection Agency has actually put out almost like an RFP for some solutions on their own for the sewage and toxic accident. That's how bad it is. I mean, it's just bizarre that here's a Homeland Security, sub-agency that's trying to get an engineering solution to this. But getting back to your question, it's I don't really know. The city and the county basically signed on to the legal push last year. When the lawsuit happened, they weren't on it. They're pretty vague as to why that is. I think that there's just some differences of opinion of how it's being handled. I don't know that it's a huge hurdle and so forth. I know
and
that
they could at some point.
The mayor's office has said that they want to be part of it. Well, they've actually taken action. The city did file a notice of intent to be part of this suit. So I'm not really sure what the hang-up is, but I think the difference here, back in what was in the 90s when Al Gore came out here, when they did the groundbreaking, not the groundbreaking, I think they opened the plant, or maybe it was the groundbreaking. You had a unified region. I mean, it's a regional problem, and poor South Bay just doesn't get the respect that it should. I mean, the officials Serge and Brian Bilbray have said, when it actually was so bad it went up to Coronado, people started paying attention, and it's really unfortunate. But the reality is, if this happened anywhere, not anywhere else in the county, but other places in the county, things would happen. Now, it is a border situation, which really complicates matters, but I don't see the state representatives as involved as they were back then. I don't see the members of Congress. They've all gone down and toured there. But basically, you've got the the local entities fighting this out, and I think they need some more horsepower.
Well, Trump administration, of course, is very concerned about humans coming over the border, but doesn't appear to make a priority about this.
Not sewage waste. And this issue's been going on. I've been involved in politics in the South Bay 28 years. It's been an issue every single year, and it's never been dealt with. And that's why a lot of people are protesting the wall, because that is not a priority, and it doesn't really help the issues that are going on at the border. There are real issues that should be dealt with.
One of the big things about the border, ironically, is that NAFTA, when NAFTA was created, it set aside money to deal with these border-related pollution problems. That's what helped fund the International Border Wastewater Treatment Plant down there, hundreds of millions of dollars, and that has been stripped out of the federal budget.
Well, we'll see what happens on this. It's an issue that's not going away, and we'll be talking about it some more. Well, that does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Art Castaneris, publisher of La Prensa, Michael Smolens, columnist for the San Diego Union Tribune, education reporter Mario Carrana, Voice of San Diego, and KPBS environment reporter Eric Anderson. Reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.